The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the Metropolitan Grand Hotel as I adjusted my black bow tie for what felt like the 100th time that evening. My hands were trembling slightly, not from nerves about the job, but from the sheer magnitude of wealth surrounding me. This wasn't just any event. This was the annual philanthropy summit, where New York's elite gathered to write checks with more zeros than most people see in a lifetime. I'd been working as a server for elite events catering for only 3 months, barely making enough to cover my rent in a cramped Brooklyn studio while putting myself through business school at night. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, studying to join the world of high finance, while serving drinks to the very people I hope to work alongside someday. "Table 12 needs champagne, Emma," called out Marcus, our head server, his voice cutting through the ambient chatter and soft jazz. "Make it quick. That's the tech sector table." I grabbed the silver tray, balancing 3 flutes of what I assumed was Dom Perignon, and weaved through the crowd of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. The air was thick with expensive perfume, and the weight of important conversations about mergers, acquisitions, and charitable donations that could fund small countries. Table 12 was positioned near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. The autumn leaves created a golden tapestry against the darkening sky, but I barely had time to appreciate the view. 3 men in impeccably tailored suits were deep in conversation, their voices low but intense. I approached with practiced grace, or at least what I hoped looked like practiced grace. "Gentlemen, your champagne," I said with a polite smile. The man with silver hair and kind eyes, who I later learned was Robert Chen, the pharmaceutical CEO, nodded gratefully. The second man, younger with an expensive watch that caught the light, barely acknowledged me, but it was the third man who made me pause. He was probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair and an intensity in his green eyes that seemed to see right through people. His suit was understated but clearly cost more than my entire wardrobe. There was something magnetic about him, the way he commanded attention without saying a word. The other men seemed to defer to him naturally. I set down the first 2 glasses without incident, but as I reached for the third, my foot caught on the edge of an ornate Persian rug. Time seemed to slow as I stumbled, the glass tilting precariously. Instead of the golden champagne I intended to serve, the contents of what I now realized was a glass of apple cider, meant for the children's table, splashed directly onto his pristine white shirt. The conversation stopped, not just at their table, but at the surrounding tables too. The silence was deafening. My face burned with embarrassment as golden liquid dripped from his shirt onto his Italian leather shoes. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," I stammered, immediately reaching for my napkin. "I can't believe let me help you." He looked down at his shirt, then back at me, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I was about to be fired, possibly sued, and definitely blacklisted from every catering company in the city. But then something unexpected happened. He smiled. Not a polite, forced smile, but a genuine one that reached his eyes. "Well," he said, his voice carrying a slight hint of an accent I couldn't place. "That's definitely a first. Sir, I am incredibly sorry. I can pay for the cleaning, or replacement, or it's just a shirt," he interrupted gently, though I knew that just a shirt probably cost more than my monthly salary. He stood up, dabbing at the stain with remarkable composure. "These things happen." Robert Chen was trying to hide a smile behind his champagne glass, while the younger man looked mortified on my behalf. But the green-eyed man, the one I'd just doused in apple cider, seemed almost amused. "I'll get you a towel, sir, and a new shirt if there's any way." "What's your name?" he asked, interrupting my panicked rambling. Emma Rodriguez." "Well, Emma Rodriguez," he said, extending a hand that I was too flustered to shake properly. "I'm Alexander Hartwell, and you've just given me the most interesting interruption I've had all evening. Alexander Hartwell. Even with my limited knowledge of New York's business elite, I knew that name. Hartwell Industries, real estate empire worth billions, youngest self-made billionaire in the city's history, and I had just served him apple cider instead of champagne. "The deals I've been discussing all night have been predictable," he continued, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with embarrassment. Cookie-cutter conversations about profit margins and market shares. But this? He gestured to his stained shirt. "This is refreshingly honest." Before I could respond, Marcus appeared at my elbow, his face pale with horror. "Mr. Hartwell, I am profoundly sorry for this incident. Emma is new, and I assure you, Marcus, isn't it?" Alexander's voice was calm, but carried an authority that made my supervisor straighten. "There's no need for apologies. Accidents happen. In fact, I was just thinking that Emma here might be exactly the kind of person who could offer a fresh perspective on something I've been considering." I stared at him, confused. Fresh perspective? I was a part-time server who'd just ruined his evening wear. He leaned closer, and I caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and understated. When he spoke, his voice was low enough that only I could hear. "Let's talk after this deal." My pulse quickened. "Sir, I don't understand. The Meridian acquisition," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving mine. "I've been negotiating it for months, but something about the whole thing feels stale, predictable. Maybe what I need is someone who isn't afraid to shake things up, even if it's by accident." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I completed my serving duties in a daze, hyper-aware of Alexander's presence across the room. Every time I glanced in his direction, he seemed to be watching me, and that small, enigmatic smile would return. Was this really happening? Had I somehow turned the most embarrassing moment of my professional life into, what exactly? A job opportunity? Something more? As the gala wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself cleaning tables with trembling hands, my mind racing with possibilities and fears in equal measure. Marcus had been uncharacteristically quiet since the incident, shooting me glances that seemed to swing between concern and confusion. "Emma," came that familiar voice behind me. I turned to find Alexander Hartwell, now wearing a fresh shirt that someone had clearly procured for him, standing just a few feet away. The room had mostly cleared out, leaving only staff and a few lingering guests. "Yes, sir? I meant what I said earlier. I think we should talk." My mouth went dry. "About the shirt? Because I really can. About the Meridian deal. About perspective. About taking risks." He paused, studying my face. "You're in business school, aren't you?" I stared at him. "How did you— the way you carry yourself, the questions in your eyes when you look around rooms like this. You're not just serving drinks. You're studying the people drinking them." He was right, and it unnerved me how easily he'd read me. "NYU, part-time. I work to pay for it. Good school. What's your focus?" "Corporate strategy and finance." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth in this context, like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't quite yet. He nodded thoughtfully. "I have a proposition for you, Emma Rodriguez, but it's not what you might expect." The way he said my name made something flutter in my chest, professional curiosity mixed with something dangerously close to attraction. "I'm listening." "Not here," he said, glancing around the nearly empty ballroom. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Hartwell Industries. Ask for me specifically." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. "Think you can manage not to spill anything on me during a business meeting?" Despite my nerves, I found myself smiling. "I make no promises." He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his entire face. "Honest. I like that." As he walked away, leaving me standing there with his business card in my hand, I realized that my life had just taken a turn I never could have planned for. One clumsy moment, one wrong drink, one stained shirt, and suddenly I was being invited into a world I'd only dreamed of joining. But as I watched Alexander Hartwell's retreating figure, impeccably dressed even after my mishap, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was about more than just business. The way he'd looked at me, the intensity in his voice when he'd said, "Let's talk after this deal," there had been something personal there, something that made my pulse race and my practical mind warn me to be careful. Whatever tomorrow would bring, I knew one thing for certain. Serving the wrong drink to a billionaire had just become the best mistake of my life. The imposing glass tower of Hartwell Industries stretched 47 floors into the Manhattan sky, its sleek facade reflecting the afternoon sun like a beacon of corporate power. Standing on the sidewalk, craning my neck to see the top, I felt like Alice about to tumble down the rabbit hole, except this wonderland was built of steel, glass, and billion-dollar deals. I'd barely slept the night before, my mind churning with possibilities and anxieties in equal measure. What could Alexander Hartwell possibly want with me? Part of me wondered if this was some elaborate practical joke, or worse, if he was the kind of powerful man who collected young women like trophies. But something about his demeanor last night, the genuine curiosity in his eyes, the way he'd handled my accident with grace rather than anger, suggested something more complex. The lobby was a masterpiece of modern minimalism, white marble floors polished to mirror perfection, abstract art that probably cost more than most people's houses, and a reception desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian. Everything whispered of money, power, and success. "I'm here to see Alexander Hartwell," I told the receptionist, a perfectly polished woman who looked like she'd stepped off the cover of Vogue. "Emma Rodriguez, I have a 2 p.m. appointment." She typed something into her computer, her manicured nails clicking against the keys like tiny hammers. "Mr. Hartwell is expecting you. 42nd floor, suite 4201. The elevator bank is to your right." The ride up seemed to take forever, each floor marking my ascent into a world I'd only observed from the outside. When the doors opened, I found myself in a reception area that was somehow both imposing and inviting. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, while comfortable seating areas suggested this was a place where important conversations happened. Ms. Rodriguez, a woman in her 50s, with silver hair and kind eyes, approached me. "I'm Margaret, Mr. Hartwell's executive assistant. He's just finishing up a call. Can I offer you coffee, tea, water? Coffee would be great, thank you. As Margaret disappeared to fetch my drink, I tried to calm my nerves by studying the space. This wasn't the cold, sterile environment I'd expected. Family photos sat alongside business awards on the credenza. Books, real books, not just display pieces, lined one wall. It felt like a place where someone actually worked, not just held court. Emma. I turned to see Alexander emerging from an inner office, and my breath caught. Gone was the formal tuxedo from last night, replaced by a charcoal gray suit that fit him like it had been made specifically for his frame, which, given his wealth, it probably had been. But it wasn't the expensive clothing that stopped me. It was the way he looked at me, like I was a puzzle he was genuinely interested in solving. "Thank you for coming," he said, extending his hand. This time I managed to shake it properly, trying to ignore the warmth that shot up my arm at the contact. "I hope you didn't have to rearrange too much of your schedule. I don't exactly have classes on Friday afternoons," I admitted, and my manager at the catering company was surprisingly understanding when I asked for the afternoon off. "Probably because you mentioned you were meeting with me," he said with a slight smile. "Marcus called me this morning to apologize again for last night's incident," as he put it. I felt my cheeks warm. "I hope you told him it wasn't his fault." I told him that sometimes the most valuable insights come from the most unexpected sources. He gestured toward his office. "Shall we?" His office was even more impressive than the reception area, a corner space with panoramic views of the city, but somehow it didn't feel ostentatious. A large desk dominated one corner, its surface surprisingly organized rather than sterile. Comfortable seating areas suggested this was a space for collaboration, not just dictation. "Please, sit wherever you're comfortable," he said, settling into one of the leather chairs rather than behind his desk. It was a subtle but important choice. We were having a conversation, not a formal interview. Margaret appeared with coffee in delicate porcelain cups, and I couldn't help but smile as Alexander accepted his. "No apple cider today?" I asked, surprised by my own boldness. He laughed, that same genuine sound from last night. "I thought we'd stick to beverages with lower spillage potential." Once Margaret had left us alone, Alexander's demeanor shifted slightly, becoming more focused, more intense. "Emma, I want to be direct with you. Last night wasn't just about a stained shirt. It was about timing, about recognizing opportunities when they present themselves in unexpected ways." I set down my coffee cup, giving him my full attention. "The Meridian acquisition I mentioned? It's a $2, $3 billion deal that I've been negotiating for 8 months. Commercial real estate portfolio, prime locations in 6 major cities. On paper, it's perfect. The numbers work, the properties are sound, the return on investment is exactly what my board wants to see. But," I prompted when he paused, "but I keep feeling like I'm missing something, like there's an angle everyone's overlooking because we're all thinking the same way, approaching it from the same perspective." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you know what I realized when you served me apple cider instead of champagne?" I shook my head. "That sometimes the mistake reveals more truth than the intended action. Everyone at that gala was having the same conversations, thinking the same thoughts, seeing the same opportunities. But you, accidentally, did something different, something that cut through all the pretense and forced a genuine moment." I was beginning to understand where this was going, but it seemed too incredible to believe. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a challenge," he said carefully. "I want you to look at the Meridian deal with fresh eyes. No preconceptions, no established methodology. Just analyze it from the ground up and tell me what you see." My heart was racing. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm flattered, but I'm a part-time business student who serves drinks to pay rent. I don't have the experience to—" "Experience can be a limitation as much as an asset," he interrupted. "My entire team, my board, my advisors, they all have decades of experience, and they're all telling me this deal is perfect. But perfect deals don't usually take 8 months to close." He stood and walked to the window, his silhouette framed against the city skyline. "I've built this company by trusting my instincts, even when, especially when, conventional wisdom said I was wrong. Right now, my instincts are telling me that this deal has a flaw everyone's missing because we're all looking at it the same way. And you think I might see something different?" He turned back to me, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that I hadn't expected. "I think you might ask different questions, challenge different assumptions, see patterns that we've become blind to." I was quiet for a long moment, trying to process what he was proposing. This was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. My career, my future, my entire life trajectory. But it was also terrifying. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Spend the weekend reviewing everything. All the financial documents, market analyses, property reports, legal assessments. Then tell me what you think. Not what you think I want to hear, but what you actually think. And if I find something, or if I don't. If you find something significant, we'll discuss next steps. If you don't, you'll have spent a weekend getting an inside look at a major corporate acquisition, which should be valuable experience for your studies. He paused. Either way, you'll be compensated for your time. The practical part of my mind was screaming that this was too good to be true, that there had to be a catch. But the ambitious part, the part that had been studying late into the night while working double shifts to pay for school, was intrigued by the possibility. Why me? I asked finally. Really? There have to be hundreds of consultants, analysts, experts you could hire. He was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. Because you're not afraid to make mistakes. Because you don't have anything to prove to me or my board or anyone else in this industry. Because when you look at a problem, you're not constrained by what's supposed to be the right answer. There was something else in his voice, something more personal, but I couldn't quite identify it. And, he added with that slight smile, because anyone who can maintain their composure after dumping apple cider on a billionaire has the kind of grace under pressure that this business requires. I found myself smiling back. I was hardly composed. I was mortified, but you didn't run away. You didn't make excuses or try to blame the catering company. You took responsibility and tried to fix the problem. He sat back down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. That's surprisingly rare in my experience. The weight of the decision pressed down on me. This could be everything I'd been working toward, or it could be a spectacular failure that ended before it began. But looking at Alexander, really looking at him, I saw something that made me want to take the risk. Okay, I said, the word coming out before I could second-guess myself. I'll do it. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. Good. Margaret will provide you with all the documentation, along with access credentials for our secure server. Everything's confidential, of course. Of course. He stood, and I realized our meeting was coming to an end. But as I rose to leave, he said something that stopped me in my tracks. Emma, I want you to know, this isn't just about the deal. I turned back to him, confused. What do you mean? I mean that meeting you last night reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. It wasn't about the money or the power or the prestige. It was about the thrill of seeing opportunities that others missed, of taking calculated risks that could change everything. He paused, his green eyes holding mine. I haven't felt that thrill in a long time. There was something in his voice, in the way he was looking at me, that made my pulse quicken. This wasn't just professional interest. There was something more personal happening here, something that both excited and frightened me. I should go, I said, though I didn't really want to. Yes, he agreed, but made no move to escort me out. I'll be interested to hear what you discover. As I walked toward the door, he called my name one more time. Emma, don't try to give me the answer you think I want to hear. Give me the truth, even if it's not what I expect. I nodded and left, my mind already spinning with possibilities and fears. As the elevator descended, carrying me back down to street level, in my ordinary life, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the precipice of something that would change everything. But was it just about the business deal? Or was there something more complex happening between Alexander Hartwell and me? Something that had nothing to do with corporate acquisitions, and everything to do with the way he looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room? Only time would tell. But first, I had a weekend to spend diving into the world of high-stakes real estate, looking for the flaw that everyone else had missed. The flaw that might be the key to everything. My studio apartment had never felt smaller than it did that Friday evening, with 3 boxes of financial documents, property reports, and legal assessments scattered across every available surface. My tiny kitchen table groaned under the weight of binders filled with market analyses, while my bed had become a staging area for architectural surveys and zoning reports. I'd ordered Chinese takeout and settled in for what I knew would be a long weekend, Alexander's words echoing in my mind. Give me the truth, even if it's not what I expect. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming at first. The Meridian deal involved 12 prime commercial properties across 6 cities: New York, Boston, Chicago, Atlanta, Seattle, and Los Angeles. Office buildings, retail complexes, mixed-use developments. On paper, as Alexander had said, it looked perfect. The properties were well located, the current occupancy rates were strong, and the projected returns were exactly what any rational investor would want to see. But as the hours passed and empty coffee cups accumulated on my windowsill, I began to see patterns that felt off. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I first noticed the anomaly in the Seattle property. The Harbor View complex was listed as having a 94% occupancy rate, which was excellent for that market. But when I cross-referenced the tenant list with the rental income projections, something didn't add up. The numbers were internally consistent within the Meridian Meridian documents, but when I started researching the individual companies listed as tenants, I found discrepancies. 3 of the major tenants, companies that supposedly accounted for nearly 30% of the building's rental income, had very limited digital footprints. Minimal websites, no social media presence, and when I searched for news articles or press releases, I found almost nothing. I made a note and kept digging. Saturday morning arrived with gray skies and the promise of rain, matching my increasingly uneasy mood. I'd found similar patterns in 2 other properties, the Atlanta retail complex and one of the Boston office buildings. Tenants with impressive-sounding names and substantial lease agreements, but virtually no verifiable business activity. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate Sarah, who was spending the weekend at her boyfriend's place. "How's the mysterious billionaire project going? Please tell me you're not falling for him." I stared at the message, realizing that somewhere between analyzing cash flow statements and researching corporate entities, I'd been thinking about Alexander almost as much as the deal itself. The way he'd looked at me in his office, the vulnerability I'd sensed beneath his professional demeanor, the feeling that this was about more than just business. I texted back, complicated, and possibly falling for more than I should be. But I pushed those thoughts aside and returned to the documents. This was too important, both for the deal and for proving myself, to let personal feelings cloud my judgment. By Saturday evening, I had filled an entire legal pad with notes and questions. The pattern was becoming clearer, and it wasn't good. At least 6 of the 12 properties showed signs of what I was beginning to suspect was rental income inflation. Not outright fraud, necessarily, but definitely creative accounting designed to make the properties appear more profitable than they actually were. The sophisticated part of the scheme was that it wasn't obvious unless you looked beyond the carefully curated documents Meridian had provided. The fake tenants were listed as subsidiaries of real companies, making them appear legitimate at first glance. The lease agreements were properly formatted and legally binding, but when you dug deeper, you found shell companies with no real business operations, paying rent to artificially inflate the property's apparent profitability. Sunday morning, I woke up with a crick in my neck from falling asleep over financial statements, and a growing certainty that I'd found the flaw Alexander's instincts had been warning him about. The Meridian portfolio wasn't worth $2.3 billion. It was probably worth 20-30% less than that. Maybe more, but proving it would require more resources than I had access to from my studio apartment. I needed to verify my suspicions, to build a case that would be compelling enough to convince someone to walk away from what appeared to be a perfect deal. I was still wrestling with how to present my findings when my phone rang Sunday afternoon. Alexander's name appeared on the screen, and my heart did that fluttering thing that I was beginning to associate with him. "Emma, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just trying to figure out how to tell a billionaire that his perfect deal might be too good to be true," I said, attempting to keep my tone light. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That sounds like a conversation we should have in person. Are you free for dinner tonight?" Dinner. Not a meeting, not a presentation. Dinner. The personal undertone that had been threading through all our interactions was becoming more pronounced. "I'd like that," I said, then immediately wondered if I was making a mistake mixing business with what felt increasingly like personal attraction. "Good. I'll pick you up at 7. And Emma, wear something comfortable. We're not going anywhere that requires you to worry about spilling things on billionaires." I could hear the smile in his voice, and despite the seriousness of what I'd discovered, I found myself smiling back. "I'll do my best." After we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. What was I doing? In the span of 3 days, I'd gone from serving drinks at a gala to potentially uncovering financial irregularities in a billion-dollar deal, all while developing feelings for a man who existed in a completely different world than mine. But as I thought about the hours I'd spent poring over those documents, the thrill of discovery, the satisfaction of seeing patterns that others had missed, I realized that this felt like exactly what I was meant to be doing. The question was whether Alexander would see my findings as valuable insight or as a threat to a deal he'd been working on for 8 months. At exactly 7 o'clock, my building's buzzer rang. When I answered, Alexander's voice came through the intercom. "Your chariot awaits, though it's considerably less fancy than you might expect." I grabbed my purse and the folder containing my analysis, took a deep breath, and headed downstairs to whatever came next. Alexander was waiting beside a sleek black sedan, but instead of his usual suit, he wore dark jeans and a casual button-down shirt that somehow made him look even more attractive than he had in his expensive business attire. There was something about seeing him dressed down that made him seem more real, more accessible. "You look beautiful," he said as I approached, and the simple compliment made my cheeks warm. "Thank you. And you look different, more relaxed. Sundays are my one day to try to be a normal person," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "Though I have to admit, normal people probably don't spend their Sunday evenings discussing potentially fraudulent real estate deals." I held up my folder. About that, we definitely need to talk. I figured. Your voice on the phone suggested you'd found something significant. He opened the car door for me. But first, food. You can't solve major corporate mysteries on an empty stomach. The restaurant he'd chosen was a small Italian place in the village. Intimate, warm, and completely unpretentious. Not what I would have expected from someone who could afford to eat anywhere in the city. This is lovely, I said, as we were seated at a corner table that offered privacy without feeling secluded. It's my favorite place to think, he admitted. The owner, Maria, makes the best ossobuco in Manhattan, and she doesn't care who I am or how much money I have. She just cares whether I clean my plate and treat her staff with respect. As if summoned by his words, an elderly Italian woman appeared at our table, her face lighting up when she saw Alexander. Alessandro, you finally bring a beautiful girl to meet me, she said, her accent thick with warmth and approval. This one has good eyes, smart eyes. Maria, this is Emma. Emma, this is Maria, who makes the rules around here. You listen to this girl, Maria said to Alexander, patting my shoulder. Women see things men miss, especially smart women. She winked at me. I bring you both the special. You talk business later. First, you eat. As Maria bustled away, Alexander shook his head with obvious affection. She's been trying to fix my love life for 3 years. And has she been successful? I asked, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question. No, he said simply, his eyes holding mine. Though I'm beginning to think she might have better instincts than I give her credit for. The comment hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that made my pulse quicken. But before I could respond, Maria returned with wine and bread baskets, and the moment passed. Over dinner, which was indeed the best ossobuco I'd ever tasted, we talked about everything except business. I learned that Alexander had grown up in a middle-class family in Ohio, that his father had been a high school principal, and his mother a nurse. That he'd built his fortune not through inheritance, but through a combination of relentless work, calculated risks, and what he called an unhealthy obsession with seeing opportunities others missed. What about you? He asked as we shared a slice of tiramisu. What made you decide to study business? Probably the same thing that drives you, I admitted. I grew up watching my parents work multiple jobs just to keep our heads above water. My father was a mechanic. My mother cleaned offices at night after working as a teacher's aide during the day. They never had the chance to build something of their own, to make strategic decisions about their future, instead of just reacting to whatever life threw at them. And you want to be in a position to make those strategic decisions. Exactly. I want to understand how money works, how deals get made, how power gets distributed. Not because I need to be rich, but because I want to have control over my own destiny. He nodded thoughtfully. That's why you didn't run away when you spilled that drink on me. You saw an opportunity, even in an embarrassing situation. I saw a chance to turn a disaster into something potentially positive, I corrected, though I had no idea it would lead to this. This? I gestured between us, encompassing the restaurant, the conversation, the growing sense of connection that felt both thrilling and dangerous. Whatever this is, I think, he said carefully, this is what happens when two people who are used to calculating every risk decide to take a chance on something they can't quite quantify. The weight of his words, and the intensity in his eyes as he spoke them, made my breath catch. We were no longer talking just about business, and we both knew it. Speaking of taking chances, I said, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground, we should probably discuss what I found in those documents. His expression shifted, becoming more focused. How bad is it? Bad enough that you should probably walk away from the deal, I said, pulling out my folder, and bad enough that someone has gone to considerable trouble to hide it. As I laid out my findings, the shell companies, the inflated occupancy rates, the suspicious tenant agreements, I watched Alexander's face grow increasingly serious. He asked sharp, detailed questions that told me he understood not just the implications, but the sophistication of what appeared to be a coordinated deception. You're absolutely certain about this? He asked when I finished. As certain as I can be without conducting a full forensic audit. But Alex... I caught myself using his first name without thinking, then forged ahead. This isn't just about inflated numbers. Someone has put a lot of effort into making this deception look legitimate. That suggests either Meridian is actively complicit, or they've been deceived by someone with considerable resources and expertise. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents spread across our table. 8 months, he said finally. 8 months of negotiations, due diligence, board meetings. My entire team missed this. They missed it because they were looking at what Meridian wanted them to see, I said gently. The documentation is sophisticated, unless you went beyond the official reports. Unless you started questioning the underlying assumptions, you wouldn't necessarily find these discrepancies. But you found them in 3 days. I found them because I didn't know what I was supposed to find. I wasn't invested in any particular outcome. I paused, then decided to be completely honest. And because someone I'm beginning to care about asked me to look for the truth, even if it wasn't what he wanted to hear. Our eyes met across the table, and I saw surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that made my heart race. "Emma," he said quietly, "you may have just saved my company from making a $250 million mistake. So what happens now? Now I have to figure out how to explain to my board that we're walking away from what they think is the deal of the decade, based on the analysis of a graduate student I met 3 days ago." He smiled ruefully. "That's going to be an interesting conversation. You could hire an independent auditing firm to verify my findings." "I could, and I will, but I already know you're right." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "My instincts have been telling me something was wrong for months. You just helped me understand what it was." The warmth of his hand on mine sent electricity up my arm, and I had to remind myself that we were sitting in a public restaurant discussing a business deal that could make or break both our careers. "There's something else," I said, though it was difficult to concentrate with his thumb tracing small circles on the back of my hand. "The sophistication of this deception suggests it wasn't a one-time thing. If Meridian is willing to go to these lengths for this deal, they've probably done it before." His expression darkened. "You think other buyers have been deceived? I think you should be very careful about how you handle walking away from this deal. If Meridian realizes you've discovered their deception, they might try to discredit your findings or find other ways to pressure you into completing the purchase." Alexander's grip on my hand tightened slightly. "Are you worried about your safety?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't really thought about that. "Well, I'm thinking about it. People don't orchestrate billion-dollar deceptions without being willing to protect them." He pulled out his phone. "I'm arranging security for you, starting tonight." "Alex, that seems like overkill." "Emma," his voice was firm, commanding in a way that reminded me he hadn't built his empire by taking unnecessary risks. "You've just uncovered evidence of massive fraud. Until we know who's behind it and how far they're willing to go to protect it, you're not taking any chances." As he made a quick call arranging for a security detail, I found myself both touched by his concern and overwhelmed by how quickly my life was spiraling into territory I'd never imagined. 3 days ago, I was worried about paying rent. Now I was potentially a target for corporate criminals. "This is crazy," I murmured when he finished his call. "This is the reality of high-stakes business," he said grimly. "When billions of dollars are on the line, people don't always play by civilized rules." The drive back to my apartment was quiet, both of us lost in thought. The security detail Alexander had arranged, 2 professionally discreet individuals in a dark SUV, followed at a respectful distance. "I want you to pack a bag," Alexander said as we pulled up to my building. "What? You're not staying here tonight. My penthouse has state-of-the-art security, and I'll feel better knowing you're safe while we figure out our next moves." I stared at him. "Alexander, I can't just move into your penthouse. That's," I struggled for the right word, "complicated. More complicated than potentially being targeted by people who've orchestrated a billion-dollar fraud." He had a point, but the idea of staying in his home, of crossing that personal line, felt like stepping off a cliff. Our relationship, whatever it was, had been building towards something all evening, and sharing his living space would only intensify feelings I was already struggling to keep in perspective. "I have guest rooms," he said, seeming to read my thoughts. "Multiple guest rooms. You'll have complete privacy." "It's not about privacy," I admitted. "It's about the fact that I'm already in way over my head with this whole situation, and staying at your place feels like diving deeper into waters I might not be able to navigate." His expression softened. "Emma, I know this is moving fast. Hell, 3 days ago I didn't even know you existed. But everything about this situation, meeting you, the deal, what you've discovered, feels like it's happening for a reason." "What kind of reason?" "I don't know yet, but I know I'm not willing to risk your safety to find out." He got out of the car and came around to open my door. "Come on, pack enough for a few days, and we'll take it one step at a time." 20 minutes later, I found myself in the elevator of another gleaming Manhattan tower, this one residential, and even more exclusive than Alexander's office building. The security detail had swept my apartment while I packed, finding nothing suspicious but making their presence a stark reminder that this was no longer just about career opportunities and romantic possibilities. Alexander's penthouse occupied the entire top floor, and as the elevator opened directly into his foyer, I had to catch my breath. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, but it was the warmth of the space that surprised me. This wasn't a cold display of wealth, it was a home, Comfortable furniture, personal photographs, books everywhere, and artwork that looked like it had been chosen for love rather than investment value. "It's beautiful," I said, setting down my overnight bag. "It's home," he said simply. "Your room is this way." He led me down a hallway lined with more personal photographs, family gatherings, what looked like college friends, candid shots that revealed a life beyond boardrooms and business deals. The guest room he showed me was spacious and elegant without being intimidating, with its own ensuite bathroom and a view of Central Park. "I'll be right down the hall if you need anything," he said, then paused at the doorway. "Emma, I want you to know, this isn't about taking advantage of the situation. This is about keeping you safe while we figure out what we're dealing with." "I know," I said, though the awareness of him being so close was already making my pulse quicken. "Alexander, what happens tomorrow? With the deal? With the board? With all of this?" "Tomorrow I call an emergency board meeting and explain why we're walking away from what they think is the opportunity of a lifetime. Then I turn your findings over to our legal team and let them decide whether we have grounds for criminal charges against Meridian. And with us?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. He moved closer, close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his green eyes. "With us, I think we stop pretending this is just about business. Alexander, I know it's complicated. I know the timing is terrible and the circumstances are extraordinary, but I also know that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you served me that apple cider." His hand came up to cup my cheek, his thumb brushing across my skin. "Tell me you feel it too." "I feel it," I whispered, leaning into his touch. "But I'm scared." "Of me? Of this? Of how fast it's happening? Of what it could mean?" I took a shaky breath. "Of what happens when this crisis passes and you realize I'm just a graduate student from Brooklyn who got lucky with a financial analysis." His eyes searched mine. "Emma, you're brilliant, brave, and honest in a world where those qualities are rare. You've potentially saved my company millions of dollars, and you did it because I asked you to look for the truth, even when that truth might cost me something I wanted." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against mine. "You're not just anything. You're extraordinary." The space between us disappeared as he kissed me, gentle at first, then deeper when I responded. It was a kiss full of promise and possibility, of questions that wouldn't be answered tonight, and feelings that neither of us was ready to fully examine. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "This changes everything," I said softly. "Yes," he agreed. "It does. I should probably go to my room now, before we do something that makes tomorrow even more complicated than it's already going to be." He smiled, though I could see the same struggle in his eyes that I was feeling. "Probably a good idea. But Emma, whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes next, I'm glad you spilled that drink on me." "So am I admitted, "even if I still can't believe any of this is real." "It's real," he said, pressing one more soft kiss to my forehead. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we change the game." As I closed the door to the guest room behind me, I leaned against it and tried to process everything that had happened. In the span of one weekend, I'd uncovered a massive fraud, potentially saved a billionaire from financial disaster, and fallen for a man who existed in a completely different world than mine. But as I looked out at the glittering lights of the city spread below, I realized that maybe those worlds weren't as different as I'd thought. Maybe what mattered wasn't where we'd started, but where we were willing to go together. Tomorrow would bring board meetings, legal battles, and decisions that could define both our futures. But tonight, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The Hartwell Industries boardroom felt like a gladiatorial arena at 8 a.m. Monday morning, complete with an audience ready for blood. 22 of the most powerful business leaders in New York sat around a mahogany table that probably cost more than most people's houses, their faces reflecting various degrees of skepticism, frustration, and barely controlled anger. I sat in a chair along the wall, technically present as a consultant, but feeling very much like a lamb among wolves. Alexander had insisted I be there for the presentation, both to answer technical questions about my analysis and, I suspected, for moral support. The security detail remained discreetly positioned outside the building, a reminder that this wasn't just about disappointing a board of directors. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, his voice carrying the authority that had built his empire, "I've called this emergency meeting to inform you that Hartwell Industries will not be proceeding with the Meridian acquisition." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Board members began talking over each other, their voices rising in a cacophony of disbelief and outrage. Robert Chen, whom I recognized from the gala, banged his coffee cup on the table for order. "Alexander, this is madness," declared Victoria Sterling, a silver-haired woman who served on half a dozen major corporate boards. "We've invested 8 months and millions in due diligence. The Meridian deal is exactly the kind of opportunity we've been seeking. The due diligence was compromised, Alexander replied calmly. We've discovered significant irregularities in the property valuations that suggest deliberate misrepresentation. Irregularities discovered by whom? Asked James Morrison, the board's most vocal skeptic of Alexander's unconventional methods. His eyes flicked toward me with obvious disdain. I hope you're not about to tell us you're willing to walk away from a $2 billion deal based on the opinion of a graduate student. The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward me. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but Alexander's steady presence gave me courage. Ms. Rodriguez, Alexander said formally, would you please present your findings to the board? I stood on legs that felt steadier than I'd expected and moved to the presentation screen. Over the weekend, I'd refined my analysis into a comprehensive report that laid out the evidence methodically and objectively. The Meridian portfolio appears profitable based on the documentation provided, I began, clicking through slides that showed occupancy rates, rental income, and projected returns. However, cross-referencing the tenant list with independent business databases reveals significant discrepancies. I walked them through my findings: the shell companies, the inflated occupancy rates, the sophisticated network of fake businesses designed to make the properties appear more valuable than they actually were. With each slide, I watched the board members' expressions shift from skepticism to concern to dawning understanding. The Harbor View complex in Seattle, for example, shows a 94% occupancy rate with projected annual rental income of $47 million, I continued. However, at least 6 of the major tenants listed have no verifiable business operations. Their lease agreements are real, but the companies themselves appear to exist solely to inflate the property's apparent profitability. Victoria Sterling leaned forward. Are you suggesting deliberate fraud? I'm suggesting that the actual value of the Meridian portfolio is significantly lower than represented, possibly 25 to 30% lower. Whether this represents fraud or simply aggressive accounting practices would require a full forensic audit to determine. James Morrison's expression had shifted from disdain to grudging interest. What's your confidence level in these findings? High enough that I would strongly recommend against proceeding with the acquisition without a comprehensive independent audit, I replied. And high enough that Mr. Hartwell should consider whether there are legal grounds for action against Meridian for misrepresentation. Robert Chen cleared his throat. Alexander, assuming Ms. Rodriguez's analysis is correct, how do you propose we handle this situation? We walk away, Alexander said firmly. Clean and simple. We express concerns about market conditions or strategic fit, but we don't reveal what we've discovered until our legal team determines the best course of action. And if Meridian suspects we know about their deception? Asked another board member. Alexander's eyes found mine across the room. Then we deal with whatever consequences follow. The vote to withdraw from the Meridian deal was unanimous, though several board members made it clear they wanted regular updates as the situation developed. As the meeting disbanded, Victoria Sterling approached me. Impressive analysis, Ms. Rodriguez, she said, extending her hand. Where did you study? NYU. Part-time, I replied, shaking her hand. I'm still working on my MBA. Alexander has a talent for recognizing potential, she said with a meaningful look toward where he stood discussing security arrangements with Robert Chen. I hope you're prepared for the attention this will bring you. As the boardroom emptied, Alexander and I found ourselves alone for the first time since our kiss the night before. The memory of it hung between us, adding an undercurrent of tension to an already charged situation. That went better than expected, he said, loosening his tie slightly. The board respects results, and your analysis was unassailable. What happens now? Now we wait to see how Meridian reacts to our withdrawal. If they're innocent of deliberate deception, they'll be disappointed but understanding. If they're complicit, he shrugged, then things get complicated. His phone buzzed with a text message, and I watched his expression darken as he read it. What is it? Marcus, your catering manager. He wants to meet for lunch to discuss your consulting work with me. Alexander looked up from his phone. Emma, I don't think that's a coincidence. A chill ran down my spine. You think Meridian knows we've discovered their scheme? I think word travels fast in certain circles, and our board meeting this morning wasn't as private as we might have hoped. He was already texting his security team. We're not taking any chances. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls with lawyers, meetings with security consultants, and increasingly tense discussions about how to proceed. Alexander insisted I stay close to him, which meant I found myself installed in his executive suite with a view of Central Park and access to resources I'd never imagined having. But it was the personal moments between the business crises that made the biggest impact. The way Alexander brought me coffee without being asked. How he insisted I use his private bathroom to freshen up, complete with designer toiletries that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The protective way he positioned himself between me and anyone who entered his office. "You don't have to take care of me," I said during a brief lull in the chaos. "I know I don't have to," he replied, looking up from a legal brief. "I want to." The simple honesty in his voice made my chest tight with emotions I wasn't ready to examine. Around 2 p.m., Margaret buzzed the intercom. "Mr. Hartwell, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says his name is Marcus Williams from Elite Events Catering. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent regarding Ms. Rodriguez." Alexander and I exchanged glances. "Send him in," Alexander said, "but call security to stand by." Marcus entered the office looking nervous and slightly out of place in his casual clothes among all the corporate luxury. His eyes found mine immediately. "Emma, thank God you're all right," he said. "I've been worried sick since I heard about your consultation work." "Heard from whom?" Alexander asked, his voice carefully neutral. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Mr. Hartwell, I don't want any trouble. I run a small catering business, and I can't afford to get crossways with the wrong people. But Emma's a good kid, and I thought she should know that some people have been asking questions about her." "What kind of questions?" I asked. "Where she lives, what her schedule is, who she's been spending time with." At first I thought maybe it was related to her new consulting work, but something felt off about it. Marcus looked directly at Alexander. The man asking the questions had money, real money, and he made it clear that providing information would be financially beneficial. Alexander's expression had gone cold, in a way that reminded me he hadn't built his fortune by being naive about human nature. "Did you provide any information?" "Hell no," Marcus said emphatically. "But I can't speak for everyone in the company. And Emma, I think you should know. They also asked about your family." My blood ran cold. "My family? Your parents in Queens, your sister at Columbia. Someone's done their homework." I felt Alexander's hand on my shoulder, steady and reassuring, but my mind was racing with fear for people who had nothing to do with corporate acquisitions and billion-dollar frauds. "Marcus," Alexander said, "I appreciate you coming forward with this information. I'd like to arrange protection for you as well, and I'll make sure you're compensated for any business disruptions this might cause." "I don't need compensation," Marcus said firmly. "I just need to know that Emma's going to be safe, and that whoever's behind this understands that my people don't know anything useful." After Marcus left, escorted by security, who would ensure he got home safely, I found myself staring out at Central Park, while my mind processed the implications of what we'd just learned. "They know," I said quietly. "They know," Alexander agreed. "The question is how much they know, and how far they're willing to go." "My family, Alexander. My parents don't have security systems or bodyguards. They don't even know what I've been doing this weekend." He was already on his phone, making arrangements. "Your family will be protected by the end of the day," he said. "Discreet protection, but effective." "This is insane," I said, turning to face him. 4 days ago, the biggest worry in my life was whether I could afford textbooks for next semester. Now I'm being stalked by corporate criminals who are threatening my family. "Emma, no, let me finish." The stress and fear and surreal nature of everything that had happened was finally catching up with me. I've fallen for a man I barely know, uncovered a massive fraud, and apparently made enemies of people who don't hesitate to threaten innocent families. How did my life become a thriller novel? Alexander crossed the room and pulled me into his arms, and I let him, because the alternative was falling apart completely. "It became a thriller novel the moment you served me apple cider instead of champagne," he said softly. "But Emma, you need to understand something. This isn't your fault. You didn't ask for any of this. You just did what I asked you to do. You looked for the truth, and now my parents are in danger because I found it. Your parents are in danger because other people chose to commit fraud, and then chose to threaten innocent people to protect their crimes. That's not on you." I pulled back to look at him. "What if we give them what they want? What if we just forget what I found and walk away? Is that what you want to do?" I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about my parents working multiple jobs, about students like me who would never have the opportunities I was being offered, about all the people who couldn't fight back against the powerful people who took advantage of them. "No," I said finally. "No, it's not." "Good," he said, his hands framing my face, "because we're going to fight this. Together. We're going to make sure Meridian faces consequences for what they've done, and we're going to make sure you and your family stay safe in the process." "How can you be so confident?" "Because I've been fighting battles like this my entire career, and because I've never had a partner whose intelligence and courage impressed me as much as yours does." Partner. The word hung between us, loaded with professional and personal implications that made my heart race. "Alexander," I said softly, "when this is over, when the crisis passes and the legal battles are settled, what happens to us?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I want to find out." His kiss was different this time, less urgent, more certain, like a promise that whatever came next, we would face it together. When we finally broke apart, his phone was buzzing insistently. The caller ID showed his head of legal. "The storm's about to get worse, isn't it?" I asked. "Probably," he agreed, answering the call. "But sometimes the only way out is through." As I listened to him discuss legal strategies and security protocols, I realized that whatever happened next, I wasn't the same person who had served drinks at a gala 4 days ago. That woman had been cautious, practical, focused on simply getting by. This woman was ready to fight for what was right, even when the stakes were higher than she'd ever imagined. The question was whether she was strong enough for what was coming. The FBI field office in Federal Plaza buzzed with the kind of controlled intensity that comes with major white-collar crime investigations. Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to Robert Chen from the board, as she'd made clear, had been reviewing our evidence for 3 hours, occasionally looking up to ask sharp, detailed questions that reminded me why federal investigators had a reputation for thoroughness. It had been 2 weeks since the emergency board meeting, 2 weeks of living under security protection, while teams of lawyers, accountants, and federal agents worked to build a case against Meridian Properties. The investigation had expanded far beyond what I'd initially discovered. It turned out that Meridian had been running similar schemes for nearly 5 years, defrauding investors of an estimated $8.2 billion across dozens of deals. "Ms. Rodriguez," Agent Chen said, closing the last folder of evidence, "your initial analysis was remarkably thorough. It's rare that we see this level of financial detective work from someone outside law enforcement or forensic accounting." "I just followed the numbers," I said, though I knew it had been more than that. It had been instinct, curiosity, and the kind of fresh perspective that comes from not knowing what you're supposed to ignore. Alexander, who had been quietly observing from the corner of the conference room, spoke up. "What's the timeline for arrests?" "We move tomorrow morning," Agent Chen replied. "Simultaneous raids on Meridian's offices in 6 cities, plus the homes of key executives. We've frozen their assets and obtained warrants for electronic surveillance." She looked between Alexander and me. "Your cooperation has been invaluable, but I need to prepare you both for what comes next." "Testimony," I said. It wasn't a question. "Multiple trials, probably lasting several months. Media attention, attempts by Meridian's lawyers to discredit your findings and your motives." Agent Chen's expression was sympathetic, but direct. "They'll argue that you were inexperienced, that your analysis was flawed, that Mr. Hartwell manipulated you into finding problems that didn't exist." I felt Alexander tense beside me. "They can argue whatever they want," he said grimly. "The evidence speaks for itself." "Evidence is one thing," Agent Chen replied. "Jury perception is another. Ms. Rodriguez, you should know that Meridian has already hired a team of investigators to look into your background, your relationship with Mr. Hartwell, anything they can use to suggest bias or incompetence." The invasion of privacy was unsettling, but after 2 weeks of living under protection, I'd gotten used to the feeling of being watched and analyzed. "Let them look," I said. "I have nothing to hide." Agent Chen smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth I'd seen from her. "That's exactly the attitude that's going to win this case." As we left the federal building, Alexander and I found ourselves walking through Lower Manhattan in the kind of crisp October afternoon that made the city feel full of possibilities. Our security detail followed at a discreet distance, but for the first time in weeks, the threat level had been reduced. Most of Meridian's key players were about to be arrested, and their organization was in chaos. "So," Alexander said as we sat on a bench in Battery Park, looking out at the harbor, "what do you want to do with the rest of your life?" The question was casual, but I could hear the weight behind it. Over the past 2 weeks, living in his penthouse while the investigation unfolded, we'd grown closer in ways that transcended the crisis that had brought us together. Quiet dinners while reviewing legal documents, late-night conversations about our hopes and fears, moments of normalcy stolen between FBI briefings and security updates. "I want to finish my MBA," I said, "but I also want to do work that matters. Analysis like this, investigations that hold powerful people accountable. What if I told you that Hartwell Industries is starting a new division, corporate intelligence and forensic analysis? What if I offered you the chance to head it up?" I looked at him, searching his face for any sign that this was about our personal relationship, rather than professional respect. "You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a career. Full salary, benefits, budget to hire your own team, complete autonomy to choose your cases." He paused. "And the chance to work with someone who thinks you're brilliant." "Alexander," I struggled to find the right words. "I don't want you to feel like you have to take care of me, or that you owe me something because of what I found." "Emma," he turned to face me fully, his green eyes serious. "In the past 2 weeks, you've handled media pressure, FBI interviews, death threats, and corporate lawyers with more grace and intelligence than most people I've worked with for years. You've asked insightful questions, challenged assumptions, and never once complained about how completely your life has been disrupted. That doesn't mean I'm qualified to run a division of your company. It means you're exactly exactly the kind of person I want working with me, not for me, with me. He reached for my hand. But Emma, I need you to know, this offer exists whether or not there's an us beyond this crisis. Your professional value isn't contingent on anything personal. I believed him. Over the weeks of getting to know each other, I'd seen how Alexander operated in business. He was calculating, strategic, but fundamentally ethical. He wouldn't risk his company's success on romantic gestures. What would this new division actually do? Due diligence investigation for major acquisitions, forensic analysis for clients who suspect they're being defrauded, corporate intelligence for companies that need to understand their competitors or partners. He smiled. Basically, you'd be a professional finder of truth in a world full of people trying to hide it. And you think I can do that? I think you just proved you can do it better than teams of people with decades more experience. The offer was everything I'd dreamed of: meaningful work, financial security, the chance to build something significant. But it was also terrifying in its scope. Can I think about it? Of course. But Emma, there's something else I want to discuss. The shift in his tone made me pay closer attention. When this crisis started, I told you we should stop pretending this was just about business. These past 2 weeks, living together, working together, facing all this together, it's shown me what my life could be like with someone who challenges me, supports me, and isn't intimidated by the complexities of my world. My heart began to race. Alexander, I'm in love with you, he said simply. I know the timing is complicated and the circumstances are extraordinary, but I needed you to know that before we figure out what comes next professionally. The words hit me like a physical force. I'd felt it too, growing between us during quiet moments and intense crises alike. But hearing him say it made it real in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. I'm in love with you too, I admitted. But Alexander, I'm scared. This world you live in, the power, the money, the constant scrutiny, I don't know if I'm strong enough for it. You've been living in it for 2 weeks, he pointed out, and you haven't just survived, you've thrived. You've impressed FBI agents, intimidated corporate lawyers, and handled media attention like someone who was born to it. That was crisis mode. That was adrenaline and necessity. What happens when things are normal? I don't know, he said honestly. But I know I want to find out with you. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching boats move across the harbor, both of us processing the magnitude of what we were considering. Emma, Alexander said finally, regardless of what you decide about the job or about us personally, I want you to know something. Meeting you didn't just potentially save my company from a bad deal. It reminded me why I fell in love with business in the first place. The intellectual challenge, the opportunity to build something meaningful, the satisfaction of solving complex problems with smart people. You make it sound like I saved you from something. Maybe you did. I was getting comfortable, relying on established patterns and conventional wisdom. You showed me the value of looking at familiar problems with fresh eyes. A week later, I stood in the conference room at Hartwell Industries, looking out at a team of 5 analysts, investigators, and researchers who would be working with me in the newly formed Corporate Intelligence Division. My office, was down the hall, complete with a view of Central Park and resources I was still learning to use effectively. The Meridian executives had been arrested in coordinated raids that made national news. The investigation had expanded to include 3 other major real estate firms and uncovered nearly a decade of systematic fraud. Alexander and I had testified before a grand jury, and while the trials were still months away, federal prosecutors were confident in their cases. Ms. Rodriguez, said David Kim, a former FBI analyst who joined our team, we've got a call from a pension fund in Chicago. They're concerned about some irregularities in their real estate investments and want us to take a look. Send me the preliminary information, I said. Let's see what they're dealing with. As my team dispersed to their various projects, I found myself alone in the conference room, looking out at the city and marveling at how completely my life had changed. 4 weeks ago, I'd been serving drinks at a gala. Now I was running a corporate division, working on cases that could impact millions of dollars and thousands of people's financial security. Emma, I turned to find Alexander in the doorway, wearing one of his perfectly tailored suits but with the slightly rumpled look that came from a long day of meetings. How was the board presentation? I asked. They approved the expansion budget for your division, he said with a smile. Apparently, Victoria Sterling was particularly impressed with your work on the Chicago case. It's a good team, I said. I'm lucky to be working with such talented people. They're lucky to be working with you. He moved closer, and I caught the familiar scent of his cologne. Any regrets about leaving the catering business? I laughed. Not a single one, though I do miss Marcus's pep talks. I spoke with him yesterday, actually. Elite Events Catering got the contract for the mayor's charity gala next month. Apparently, word has gotten around that you discovered the Meridian fraud and people are requesting the catering company that trained the brilliant investigator. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased that something positive had come to Marcus from all the chaos. Emma, Alexander said, his tone becoming more serious, there's something I want to ask you. Before I could respond, he was down on one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. My breath caught in my throat. I know it's only been a month, he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was doing. I know this is crazy and impulsive and probably too soon. But Emma, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. He opened the box to reveal a ring that was elegant and understated, a single diamond in a classic setting that somehow managed to be both timeless and perfectly suited to me. You've changed everything about how I see the world, how I approach challenges, how I think about the future. You've made me want to be the kind of man who deserves someone as extraordinary as you. He took a breath. Emma Rodriguez, will you marry me? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with all the complexity and possibility of our unlikely love story. A month ago, neither of us could have imagined this moment. But looking at Alexander, seeing the vulnerability and hope in his eyes, I realized that sometimes the best decisions are the ones that feel impossible until they feel inevitable. Yes, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Yes. Absolutely yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger with hands that weren't quite steady, then stood and pulled me into his arms. The kiss was soft and sure, full of promise for a future neither of us could have planned, but both of us were ready to build together. I love you, he said against my lips. I love you too, I replied, even though you're completely crazy. Crazy enough to propose to a woman who dumped apple cider on me at a charity gala? Crazy enough to think that was the beginning of something instead of just an embarrassing accident. He laughed, spinning me around the conference room while Manhattan sparkled beyond the windows. 6 months later, standing in the garden of the Metropolitan Grand Hotel, the same venue where we'd first met, I watched Alexander adjust his tie nervously as our wedding guests took their seats. The guest list was an eclectic mix of his business associates, my family and friends from school, FBI agents who'd become allies, and Marcus, who'd insisted on providing the catering for free as a wedding gift. You look beautiful, said my sister Maria, adjusting my veil one final time. I look terrified, I replied, though I was smiling. Good terrified or bad terrified? Good terrified. Definitely good terrified. As the music started and I began walking down the aisle, I caught sight of Alexander waiting for me at the altar. His expression when he saw me was everything I could have hoped for. Love, wonder, and the same sense of possibility that had been building between us since that first night. The ceremony itself was a blur of vows and rings and promises for the future. But the moment that stood out most clearly was when the minister pronounced us husband and wife, and Alexander whispered, "Thank you for serving me the wrong drink," just before he kissed me. The reception was held in the same ballroom where we'd met, but this time, I was the one being served, instead of doing the serving. As we danced our first dance as husband and wife, I marveled at how surreal it felt to be back in this space under such completely different circumstances. Any regrets? Alexander asked as we swayed to the music. About marrying a man I met by accidentally dousing him with apple cider? Not a single one. Good, he said, spinning me gently, because I have plans for us, Mrs. Hartwell. Mrs. Hartwell. The name still felt strange but wonderful, like a dress that would take time to break in, but was perfectly tailored for me. What kind of plans? The kind that involve building something amazing together, professionally and personally. As if to punctuate his words, Victoria Sterling approached us as the song ended. "Emma, congratulations," she said warmly. "I have a proposition for you both." "Another acquisition?" I asked with a smile. "Better, a congressional committee investigating financial fraud in commercial real estate. They want expert witnesses who can explain complex schemes to lawmakers and the public." She looked between Alexander and me. "They specifically requested the team that uncovered the Meridian fraud." I felt Alexander's hand squeeze mine. "When do they need an answer?" "After your honeymoon," Victoria said with a knowing smile. "This can wait. But Emma, you should know. Your reputation in this field is already becoming legendary. There are going to be more opportunities than you can possibly accept." As Victoria walked away, I turned to my new husband. "A legendary reputation built on accidentally serving you the wrong drink. The best discoveries often start with accidents," he said. "But Emma, what followed wasn't accidental. Your brilliance, your courage, your integrity, none of that was luck." Later that evening, as our guests enjoyed cake and dancing, I found myself standing on the hotel's terrace, looking out at the city lights and thinking about how dramatically my life had changed. My parents were inside, still slightly overwhelmed by the opulence but glowing with pride. My sister was deep in conversation with one of Alexander's Harvard Business School friends, and I had a feeling there might be another romance brewing. Enjoying the view, Marcus appeared beside me, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "It's incredible," I said, accepting the drink. "Marcus, I can't thank you enough for everything. If you hadn't warned us about those people asking questions, you would have figured something else out," he said confidently. "You're resourceful like that. But Emma, I want you to remember something as you start this new life." "What's that?" "Stay hungry. Stay curious. Don't let all this," he gestured toward the elegant reception, "make you forget what it feels like to wonder how you're going to pay rent next month." I understood what he was saying. Success and security could be as dangerous as poverty if they made you stop fighting, stop questioning, stop pushing boundaries. "I won't forget," I promised. "Good. Because the world needs more people who aren't afraid to ask difficult questions, even when the answers might be inconvenient for powerful people." Alexander appeared at my side, sliding an arm around my waist. "Are you two plotting something?" "Just making sure your new wife stays dangerous," Marcus said with a grin. "I'm counting on it," Alexander replied, pressing a kiss to my temple. As the evening wound down and our guests began to leave, Alexander and I found ourselves alone in the bridal suite, finally able to process everything that had happened, not just that day, but over the past months. "So, Mrs. Hartwell," he said, loosening his tie, "how does it feel to be married to a billionaire?" "Like the most natural thing in the world," I said, stepping out of my heels with a sigh of relief, though I have to admit, I still can't quite believe this is my life. "Believe it," he said, pulling me close. "You've earned every bit of it." "We've earned it," I corrected. "This partnership, this team we've built, it's not just about me." "No," he agreed. "It's about us, about what we can accomplish together." He was right. Over the months of building the corporate intelligence division, we'd discovered that we worked together seamlessly, his strategic vision and business acumen complementing my analytical skills and fresh perspective. We challenged each other professionally, while supporting each other personally, creating something stronger than either of us could have achieved alone. "Alexander," I said, settling into his arms, "what do you think our life will look like 5 years from now?" "I think we'll have expanded the division internationally," he said thoughtfully. "I think you'll probably be testifying before Congress regularly, maybe writing a book about corporate fraud detection. I think we'll have made a real difference in how business gets done. And personally," his arms tightened around me, "personally, I think we'll have learned how to balance all of that with having a family, with building something that lasts beyond quarterly reports and board meetings." The mention of family made my heart skip. We'd talked about children in abstract terms, but hearing him voice it as a concrete possibility made it feel real and immediate. "I'd like that," I said softly. "Good. Because I have a confession to make." I pulled back to look at him. "What?" "I've already started setting up trust funds, college accounts, long-term financial planning for hypothetical future Hartwells." I stared at him, then burst out laughing. "You've been married to me for exactly 4 hours, and you're already planning our children's college finances." "I'm a strategic thinker," he said with mock defensiveness. "I like to plan ahead." "I love you," I said, shaking my head at his beautiful, ridiculous practicality. "I love that you plan trust funds for imaginary children, and I love that you proposed to me in a conference room, and I love that you somehow saw potential in a woman who served you apple cider instead of champagne. I love that you had the courage to tell me the truth even when it meant potentially costing me millions of dollars," he replied. "I love that you care more about doing what's right than about what's profitable. I love that you make me want to be better than I was before I met you." We stood there holding each other in comfortable silence, both of us probably thinking about the unlikely series of events that had brought us to this moment. A wrong drink, a stained shirt, a billionaire's instinct that something wasn't quite right with a perfect deal, a graduate student brave enough to look beyond the obvious answers. "Emma," Alexander said eventually, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd served me the right drink that night?" I considered the question seriously. "I think we still would have found each other somehow. Maybe not that night, maybe not that way, but somehow. Some opportunities are too important to miss forever." "I like to think so too," he agreed, "but I'm grateful it happened the way it did. I'm grateful for every mistake, every accident, every moment of chaos that led us here. Even the death threats and FBI interviews, especially those. They showed me what you're made of under pressure." As we prepared for bed, our first night as husband and wife, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and had to smile. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the nervous server who'd been working the gala 6 months ago. This woman stood straighter, spoke with more confidence, dressed in clothes that fit properly and suited her. But more than the external changes, there was something different in her eyes, a sense of purpose, of belonging, of knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of achieving. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, noticing my contemplation. just how much has changed, how much I've changed. You haven't changed, he said, coming to stand behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders. You've just become more yourself, the woman who analyzed those documents, who stood up to corporate criminals, who built a division from nothing. She was always there. You just needed the right opportunity to let her out. He was right. The courage, the analytical mind, the determination to seek truth, even when it was inconvenient, those qualities had always been part of me. Meeting Alexander hadn't created them. It had just given me a stage big enough to showcase them. Thank you, I said, turning in his arms. For what? For seeing who I could be before I saw it myself, for giving me the chance to prove it, for believing in me even when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. Thank you for taking the chance, he replied, for saying yes to dinner, to the job, to the proposal, to all of it. It was the easiest yes of my life, I said, all of them. And as we turned off the lights and settled into bed together, husband and wife, business partners, co-conspirators in building something bigger than either of us could achieve alone, I realized that serving the wrong drink to a billionaire hadn't just been the best mistake of my life. It had been the beginning of everything I was meant to become. The conference room at Hartwell Rodriguez Corporate Intelligence buzzed with the energy of a team that had just cracked a particularly challenging case. My team of 12 analysts, investigators, and researchers had spent the past 6 months unraveling a cryptocurrency fraud that had defrauded investors of over $400 million. The arrests had been made that morning, and the FBI was crediting our investigation with breaking the case wide open. Excellent work, everyone, I said, addressing the team from my position at the head of the conference table. Take the rest of the day off. You've earned it. As my team filed out, chattering excitedly about their plans, I remained behind to review the final reports. The company had grown beyond anything Alexander and I had initially envisioned. We now had offices in New York, London, and Tokyo, with a client list that included Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and international law enforcement organizations. Mrs. Hartwell, my assistant Jennifer, appeared in the doorway. Your 3:00 appointment is here. Thank you. Send them in. I looked up to see a young woman entering the conference room, nervously clutching a folder. She was probably mid-20s, professionally dressed, but clearly intimidated by the upscale surroundings. She reminded me of myself 5 years ago. Ms. Patterson, please have a seat, I said warmly. I understand you have some concerns about your employer's financial practices. Sarah Patterson worked as a junior accountant for a mid-sized construction company, and over the past few months, she'd noticed irregularities in their billing practices that suggested systematic overbilling of government contracts. The amounts weren't huge, not compared to the Meridian case, but they represented the kind of systemic corruption that cost taxpayers millions and gave honest companies unfair disadvantages. As Sarah laid out her concerns, showing me the documentation she'd carefully compiled, I was struck by her thoroughness and courage. She was risking her career to expose wrongdoing, with no guarantee that anyone would listen or that justice would be served. Ms. Patterson, I said when she finished her presentation, this is excellent work, detailed, methodical, and compelling. Have you considered a career in forensic accounting? She looked surprised. I'd need additional training, and I'm not sure I could afford to go back to school. What if I told you we have a training program for promising analysts, full salary while you complete additional coursework, mentorship from experienced investigators, and the opportunity to work on cases that make a real difference? Her eyes widened. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you an opportunity to turn your talent for noticing what others miss into a career exposing financial crimes. As Sarah left my office with an employment packet and a start date 2 weeks away, I felt the familiar satisfaction that came from recognizing potential and providing opportunities for people who deserved them. Recruiting again? Alexander's voice came from behind me. I turned to see my husband leaning against the doorframe, wearing one of his perfectly tailored suits, but with the slightly tired look that came from a long day of board meetings and strategic planning sessions. She reminds me of someone I used to know, I said with a smile. Young, talented, stuck in a job that doesn't utilize her abilities, worried about how she's going to pay for her education. Sounds familiar, he agreed, moving to wrap his arms around me from behind. Any regrets about taking a chance on that someone? Not a single one, I said, leaning back against his chest. How was your day? Productive. The Shanghai expansion is moving forward. The London office exceeded their quarterly targets, and the board approved funding for your new cybersecurity division. Our cybersecurity division, I corrected automatically. While the corporate intelligence division operated with significant autonomy, all major decisions were collaborative. Alexander's business acumen and strategic vision remained essential to our success. Our cybersecurity division, he agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. Speaking of which, I have news. Good news or complicated news? Both. The Department of Justice wants us to testify before Congress again. This time it's about cryptocurrency regulation and fraud prevention. I turned in his arms. When? Next month. But Emma, there's something else. They want to know if you'd be interested in serving on a presidential commission for financial crime prevention. I stared at him. A presidential commission would be a significant honor, but it would also mean extensive travel, high-profile hearings, and the kind of public scrutiny that still sometimes made me uncomfortable. What do you think? I asked. I think you're the most qualified person in the country for that kind of position. I also think it would be an incredible platform for the kind of systemic change you've been advocating for. And personally, how would you feel about your wife spending months in Washington testifying before Congress and working with federal agencies? His expression grew serious. Personally, I'd be incredibly proud and completely supportive. Emma, you've built something extraordinary here. The work you're doing matters in ways that go far beyond profit margins and quarterly reports. If you have the opportunity to make that impact on a national scale, I think you should take it. Even if it means more time apart, more complications in our personal life, we've managed complications before, he said with a slight smile. And besides, I can work from Washington as easily as from New York. Hartwell Industries has gotten very good at remote operations. The offer was tempting, but there was another consideration that made the decision more complex. Alexander, there's something I need to tell you, I said, stepping back slightly so I could see his face clearly. What is it? I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air for a moment while he processed them. Then his face broke into a grin that was pure joy. Pregnant? Really? Really. About 8 weeks. I wanted to be sure before I told you. He picked me up and spun me around the conference room, both of us laughing. When he set me down, his hands immediately went to my still flat stomach. This changes everything, he said softly. It changes some things, I agreed, but maybe not as much as we think. We have excellent staff, reliable systems, and the kind of resources that make balancing work and family more manageable than it would be for most people. You want to take the commission appointment? I thought about it seriously. The work was important, potentially groundbreaking in terms of federal policy on financial crime. But it would also mean traveling during pregnancy, potentially missing time with our child during those crucial early months. I want to propose a compromise, I said finally. I'll take the appointment, but with the understanding that I may need to modify my schedule depending on pregnancy complications and after the baby arrives. If they can work with that, then yes, I think we should do this. We? Alexander, I couldn't do any of this without you. The business, the investigations, the testimony, all of it works because we're a team. If I'm going to serve on a presidential commission, I'll need you there supporting me, challenging me, helping me see the big picture. He cupped my face in his hands. Emma Hartwell, have I mentioned lately that I'm completely in love with you? Not since this morning, I teased, but I never get tired of hearing it. I love your brilliance, your integrity, your courage, and your complete inability to back down from a challenge. He paused, his thumbs brushing across my cheekbones. And I love that you're going to be the mother of my children. Children, plural? Well, we have those trust funds I set up, he said with mock seriousness. It would be a shame to waste them. I laughed, remembering his confession on our wedding night about planning finances for hypothetical future Hartwells. 6 months later, I stood in the hearing room of the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, 8 months pregnant and wearing a navy blue maternity suit that had been specially tailored to accommodate both my growing belly and the serious nature of the proceedings. Ms. Hartwell, Senator Williams began, in your expert opinion, what are the most significant gaps in our current regulatory framework for preventing financial fraud? I looked out at the room full of senators, reporters, and observers, then began my testimony with the confidence that came from 5 years of building cases, exposing crimes, and fighting for financial justice. Senator, the most significant gap is the assumption that sophisticated criminals will be deterred by traditional oversight methods. As I spoke, I could see Alexander in the gallery, along with my parents, who had flown in from Queens to watch their daughter testify before Congress. The boy who would soon be their first grandchild kicked vigorously, as if he too was excited to be part of this moment. After the hearing, as Alexander and I walked through the halls of the Capitol building, I reflected on how far we'd come from that night at the Metropolitan Grand Hotel. Any regrets about marrying a woman who can't seem to stay out of high-stakes situations? I asked, pausing to rest for a moment as pregnancy fatigue caught up with me. Are you kidding? I married you specifically because you can't stay out of high-stakes situations, he replied, offering me his arm for support. That's what makes you extraordinary. Even when those situations involve death threats, federal investigations, and congressional testimony, especially then. Emma, you've built a career exposing truth in a world full of people trying to hide it. Our son is going to grow up, knowing that his mother made a difference, that she fought for justice, and wasn't intimidated by powerful people who wanted to silence her. Our son, We'd found out the baby's gender the week before, and hearing Alexander say it still gave me a thrill of anticipation and joy. What do you think we should name him? I've been thinking about that, Alexander said as we stepped outside into the crisp December air. What do you think about Marcus, after the man who warned us about the threats against you? I stopped walking, touched by the suggestion. Marcus had become more than just a former employer. He'd become a friend and mentor, someone who regularly checked in on our success and offered grounded perspective when the corporate world threatened to become too insular. Marcus Hartwell, I said, testing the name. I like it. Marcus would be honored. And embarrassed, Alexander added with a smile, but honored. As we waited for our car to arrive, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. A wrong drink served at a charity gala had led to the discovery of a massive fraud, which had led to a career in corporate intelligence, which had led to marriage, and now to a family, and a platform for creating systemic change in how financial crimes were prevented and prosecuted. Alexander, I said, as we settled into the back seat of our car, do you ever wonder what our life would have been like if I'd been a more competent server? Never, he said firmly, because even if you'd served me the right drink that night, I still would have noticed you. How can you be so sure? Because you were the only person in that room who looked at the guests like you were studying them instead of just serving them. You were curious about their conversations, interested in their world, analyzing their behavior. He took my hand. I would have found a way to talk to you eventually. You noticed all that from across a ballroom? I notice everything about you, Emma. I always have. The car pulled up to our hotel, and as Alexander helped me out, pregnancy had made me less graceful than I'd once been. I caught sight of our reflection in the lobby's mirrored walls. We looked like what we'd become, successful, confident, ready to take on whatever challenges came next. But more than that, we looked like partners in every sense of the word, equal contributors to something bigger than either of us could have achieved alone. Later that evening, as we sat in our hotel suite reviewing the day's testimony and preparing for the next round of hearings, I felt the baby move again. Strong kicks that suggested he was going to be as energetic and determined as his parents. He's active tonight, Alexander observed, his hand resting on my stomach. He gets excited when we're working on important cases, I said. I think he's going to be a natural investigator. God help us if he inherits your talent for finding trouble. And your talent for turning trouble into opportunity, I added. Alexander was quiet for a moment, then said, Emma, I want to ask you something. What? Are you happy, really, truly happy with how everything has turned out? I considered the question seriously. 5 years ago, I'd been struggling to pay rent while working toward a business degree. Now I was married to a man I loved deeply, running a successful company that made a real difference in the world, expecting our first child, and serving on a presidential commission. It was a life I couldn't have imagined, much less planned for. I'm happier than I ever thought possible, I said honestly. But Alexander, it's not because of the success or the money or the recognition. It's because I get to wake up every day and work on things that matter, with a person who challenges me and supports me and makes me want to be better than I was the day before. That's all I've ever wanted, he said softly, for both of us. What about you? Any regrets about building your life around a woman who dumped apple cider on your shirt? My only regret, he said, leaning over to kiss me, is that it took me 8 months to realize that perfect deal was too good to be true. If I'd trusted my instincts sooner, we might have started working together earlier. If you'd trusted your instincts sooner, I might not have been ready for the opportunity, I pointed out. Sometimes the timing has to be exactly right, like serving the wrong drink at exactly the right moment. Exactly like that. As we prepared for bed, I found myself looking forward to the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring more congressional hearings, more questions about financial reform, more chances to advocate for the kind of systemic changes that could prevent future frauds like Meridian. Next month would bring the birth of our son, and all the joy and chaos that comes with becoming parents for the first time. Next year would likely bring new cases, new investigations, new opportunities to make a difference in how business gets conducted and how justice gets served. But tonight, as I fell asleep in Alexander's arms with our son moving gently beneath my heart, I was content to simply appreciate how beautifully unexpected life could be when you were brave enough to embrace the accidents that turned out to be opportunities. After all, sometimes the wrong drink served to the right person at the perfect moment can change everything, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, it can change everything for the better.